Hi, Sayo.
Good morning to you, Trinidad and Tobago, and welcome inside the Now Morning Show. Today is Tuesday, the 5th day of October, and yesterday we heard the budget for fiscal 2022, and this morning we're going to get into discussing it. Good morning, Natalie.
Good morning, Raucus. And of course, our guests are already here. Don't worry, we'll get to them in just a minute. But no, it's no longer any budget expectation. It's the budget response. Colin Imbert laid out his plan for Trinidad and Tobago for the next fiscal year. And it seemed some people were pleased, and as usual, some weren't. But I don't think you can please everybody. So, according to Mr. Imbert, listen, we have done exceptionally well. My words, but he's saying that Trinidad and Tobago has done well considering, all that it's been through, especially with the pandemic, and, that it's been able to maintain its rating. It looks at the reserves that it has. It looks at its, the Heritage and Stabilization Fund. And, of course, there were a lot of little goodies inside. The Nurses Association might be happy. The Car Dealers Association might be happy. I think some people might be happy in there, but I'm sure we'll have to speak with some of the people who are unhappy during the week.
So, I don't think all of the car dealers will be happy. Some of them might not be so happy. Last night in some of the post-budget discussions, you heard some complaints already starting to come up. They're saying that the people who deal in roll-on, roll-off vehicles, they're going to feel a bit of a pain as compared to people who import in new electric cars. They're going to get the benefits.
It's something they've been complaining about,
exactly.
The fact that new car dealers don't have any cap on the amount of vehicles they can bring in. But listen, all along they've been asking for the removal of taxes on electric vehicles. They got it and they're still unhappy. So you know what? We'll get into that in the next hour.
You don't know you can't please people. But this morning, we want to welcome the Secretary of Finance and Economy at the Tobago House of Assembly, Mr. Joel Jack, is with us this morning, as well as economist, lecturer at University of the West Indies, Vaalmikki Arjoon. Good morning, gentlemen.
Good morning. Good morning.
Yes, good morning. Nice to have you both here. I'm feeling excited. But Joel, let me start with you. What you made of the budget presentation and the amount of money. This is always a point, how much money Tobago got.
Well, good morning, Natalie. Let me start off first of all by saying good morning to Tobago and Trinidad and Tobago. Thank you for having me on. But I am excited about this year's budget statement. I left the chamber yesterday feeling elated, feeling hopeful, and with a positive outlook for Trinidad and Tobago. And in the context of Tobago, I think the $2.357 billion allocation for Tobago augurs well for us in terms of touching some of the key sectors. And I want to thank the Minister for responding to our request this year, as our request was informed by a lot of consultations with various stakeholders, and it came out in the budget.
How much did you ask for this year?
We asked for 4.7. And we were hoping that at the time that the passage of the internal self-government bills, those two bills that are currently before Parliament, that they would have been passed unanimously with the support of both sides of the House. But it's still before Parliament, and if that bill was passed, I would have received over $3 billion, an additional $1.2 billion or $1.5 billion according to today's
So then
budget
what makes
numbers.
you so happy? You're $2 billion plus out in terms of what you asked for.
Yeah.
Well, I'm excited because some of the key sectors and some of our recommendations, we got the necessary funding for the $50 million allocated to the tourism sector. That was approved. We got an additional $30 million for the agriculture sector. We also received $20 million to improve our green spaces, which will go towards improving our sites and attractions for the tourism sector as well. Additionally, the minister indicated that we will have the financial flexibility to approach the bond market to raise additional financing beyond the $2.357 billion. So
in other words, you'll be able to treat with the shortfall, the $2 billion plus shortfall. Because I was wondering to myself that if you asked for $4 billion and you got less than half of that, then obviously there has to be some things that you will not be able to treat with. But you're saying to me that Tobago will go to the market and try to raise that money.
We'll raise additional funding. And what I have done since 2013, since assuming office as Secretary of Finance, what I have done in the past was to come to the people of Tobago, to go to the legislature and to table a revised budget or revised allocation, reporting to them the projects that we will undertake, how we would appropriate the funding, and the key sectors that we'll continue to focus on. So that has been my modus operandi in the past. However, we have a political interregnum before us now, that's 6-6 deadlock, so we are unable to do that. So once we cross the hurdles of the election, I give the people of the Tobago my commitment that we will continue and table that reallocation. We'll have that debate and table the reallocation motion early
we'll get back to you, because
I
think that 6-6 is a saying to Tobago that we are unhappy with the People's National Movement. I don't know that we could interpret it any other way. If you have a new political party, Watson Duke went up as an independent, then he went up and he gained, what was it, 2 seats, and now he went from 2 to 6. It means that he keeps growing and getting traction, which means that you're losing, which means that it is the people are saying, listen, you need to fix some things, but we'll get back to that.
Most definitely, Natalie. So we'll have a discussion on that. But I think the people in Tobago, they're ready to, to right the wrong, because in some persons, in their view, the PNM would have won the election already. So some of them stayed at home. When you look at the numbers, but however, come time for the next election, it will be a horse of a different story.
Listen, I think the people are just telling you, don't be complacent. That you listen, you have to work on the job and work for the job. That's it.
And we have delivered, and we will continue to do so. But we'll discuss that
Arjoon,
later.
good morning to you. Thank you so much for joining us. Your overall view of the budget presentation yesterday?
Well, first of all, we have to remember that this budget was presented against the backdrop of an economy that would have declined by close to 17% over the last 5 years. From fiscal 2016 to 2020, we declined by close to 17%. If you count the figures from this fiscal year that just went by, we've had a 6-year fiscal deficit of about $60 to $61 billion. That meant we spent $60 to $61 billion more than what we actually earned in revenues. We've had a balance of payments deficit of about $4.5 billion US. Foreign direct investment is in the negative zone, well over negative 800 million, which means foreign investors are actually pulling their money out of TNT. And again, we're very close to being in the junk or the speculative grade region with the credit rating agencies, Standard & Poor's. Moody's already has us there, largely, again, because we didn't earn adequate revenues in the last few years. So we had no choice, like the bulk of the world out there, because of the pandemic, we had no choice but to borrow, which has brought our debt to GDP ratio to 84.5%. But in spite of all of this, the economy is still standing. So I think this is something that we all really need to be grateful for. And in the coming, and right now, we would be benefiting from higher oil and gas prices, and by and large, these higher oil and gas prices, coupled with an increment in production within the coming fiscal year, is going to augur quite well for us, helping to most likely narrow our fiscal deficit. In last fiscal year, it was about $13 billion. This year, I think they budgeted for it to be around $8 or $9 billion, $9 billion in that vicinity. That is going to augur quite well for us. I think, however, one of the things that would affect our revenue streams in this coming fiscal year is our taxes on income and profits. The taxes on income and profits, it would have taken quite a hit within the last couple of years, because many companies would have been thrust in an unprofitable position, given that they had 2 lockdowns in the space of 18 months. And data is very telling us. So I just want to give you some data here. When we look at the retail sector in the first quarter of last year, the second quarter of last year, that's at the height of the pandemic, retail sales would have fallen by about 17%. And when you drill down into the data, hardware sales fell by 34%, household appliance and furniture fell by 8%, motor vehicle and parts fell by a whopping 61%. Textiles and apparel fell by about 59%. So, and this is just one sector for one particular quarter. under one lockdown. So can you imagine other sectors and having to go through this twice? The private sector's revenues and their cash flow streams have taken a beating. So therefore, in a loss-making position, you're not going to pay corporation taxes, and there's an accounting principle called the tax losses carried forward, which means that they will carry forward these tax losses, and that will affect the government's ability to earn the taxes on income and profits. But the saving grace, yet again, the energy sector. Energy sector will be picking up a lot of the brunt of this, given the saving grace that I call it, that we are afforded at least one of them at this particular point in time, that energy prices are higher, and we do expect some uptick in energy production coming into the future.
We have seen the Minister peg a budget on oil prices, I think $65, and gas prices $3.57, I think. Every year we hear that, listen, too high, because that's not where it is right now. Is it realistic? Or, he did say, and I think people accept that there is going to be an uptick in the prices of oil and gas over the next coming months.
Well, so I like the fact that he is being conservative at this particular point in time. The US EIA expects the oil price, Brent, which is where we are closer to be about $66 per barrel. I think he pegged it at $65. So I think going along with that was a good idea. I would have probably advised to go at $60 a barrel, but that $5 difference, I think, is neither here nor there at this particular point in time. When you consider, for example, Goldman and Sachs, their projected oil price is at about $90 a barrel at the end of this year, and right now it is over $80 per barrel. You see, what's likely to happen is that I think oil prices will continue to be high going into next year. And the reason for this is that, we've spoken about this before, there's a very huge pent-up demand that has been unleashed across the world in terms of consumption activities, investment activities, industrial activities, and of course, that means transportation activities as well. We're seeing it causing a lot of shortages with respect to access to shipping vessels and containers as well, causing the prices of those to shoot quite high. So that surge in investment and production activities and consumption activities is going to go well into next year. That, coupled with the fact that Hurricane Ida recently would have cut or caused a loss in production in the United States of about 30 million barrels. And then when you look at China, because the demand for manufacturing is so high and there's a shortage of gas, China is now facing an energy crunch. In fact, recently we've heard reports of industrial blackouts in China, and that has hit manufacturing. All of this shows that there's a very high demand for energy commodities,
which will
because
drive
of
the prices up,
because of the reopening of the economies. Now, OPEC Plus group of countries, they have sat and they've met, and they have agreed to try to ramp up production by about 400,000 barrels of oil per day. But I don't think at this point in time that is actually going to be adequate to really drop the price, especially drop it significantly at a level that we will
it will affect us negatively. I don't think that will happen.
Not at this particular point in time.
But Joel, let's bring you back in on the conversation, because I know that when it comes on to the whole idea of oil and gas, that Tobago sits in a unique position where when it comes on to the Tobago Autonomy Bill, we were looking at nautical miles and how this would affect Tobago. So when you sit and you hear of these, oil and gas prices and what the outlook for the sector looks like, how does it, affect you as Secretary for Finance? As Secretary for Finance, I'm just trying to figure out if this is something that, when that bill gets back to the House, if it is something that Tobago is still going to be, looking at in terms of the nautical miles, because I know one of the issues is that, there is some oil and gas somewhere out there, and depending on how much nautical miles Tobago gets, they could literally be sitting on the gold mine.
Well, a couple of things, Natalie. One, yes, we have some major oil and gas finds, proven gas reserves off Tobago's waters. And we have been in discussions with the major oil companies, Shell and BHP, with respect to their projections as it relates to monetizing those proven reserves. And but beyond that, if you look at the proposed legislation that is currently before Parliament, in addition to the 6.8% allocation to Tobago, there's provision in the bill for revenue sharing and other measures. So it's a 6.8% plus in terms of allocation, because what Tobago brings to the Union is that Tobago extends the country's exclusive economic zone. So going up all the way up to Grenada, Barbados, far south as Guyana. So we extend the country's exclusive economic zone. So it's much more than the proven reserves within or in close proximity to our territorial waters, and the bill takes all these things into consideration and makes provision for Tobago to receive enhanced support. Because as the Minister rightfully indicated in the budget, any funding and any provision to resource Tobago, what it does, it enables Tobago to increase its contribution to national economic activity. And if we use Tobago and tourism, the tourism sector, as our point of focus for economic diversification and being part of the National Diversification Plan, it places Tobago and Trinidad and Tobago in an advantageous position, because one, we're able to earn foreign exchange, we're able also to stimulate a lot of business and economic activity in Trinidad through our already established manufacturing sector. We could go back to the proposed sandals project, and a number of the manufacturers in Trinidad, they were already sitting negotiating with sandals. Listen, we can supply produce, products. Right. You know, so
but that is off the table, at least for now.
But we have other projects.
No, well, I was just about to say that I don't want to talk about sandals because it's off the table now, but we can talk about the Marriott. Yes. We can talk about the other hotels that are supposed to be coming and how that can, you know, improve the economic outlook for Tobago. But the reality is we have one fiscal year.
Yes.
These things might not be realized within the next year. So then, you know, I always ask, with the THA being the biggest employer on the island, with the Tobago House of Assembly being the biggest employer, how do you manage a $2.3 billion budget when you have such a big workforce to pay? And because we know that a lot of the money that goes from the budget to Tobago goes to recurrent expenditure, and I think that's a huge part of the problem.
Well, if you look at the allocation to Tobago, and you look at and you construct you disaggregate the data respect to the allocation nationally, it mirrors the same. In terms of our allocation for the development program, it went up from $200 million to $264 million. If you look at our development program as well, we got $1.916 billion. It went up by $153 million or so. So, and when you look at the request for us on the DP side, we requested $1.5 billion. We allocated $264. However, we have the provision and the financial flexibility to raise additional funding to cover some of the expenditure for PSIP. And this also mirrors nationally what happens. So the Minister for Housing, although his allocation might be whatever it is, they also, Ms. Beckles will have the flexibility of going on the bond market and raising additional funding to build thousands of houses and to provide housing solutions to persons here in Trinidad. In the Tobago context, we're also looking at how do we treat with that housing demand and all the applications that we have on hand. And that is why we are currently exploring, using the PPP modality, the Sherburne Integrated Housing Development, where we'll be providing at least between 250 and 300 housing units, commercial and green space, and we're looking at other mechanisms outside of the subvention to accelerate the pace of the island's development.
Well, I am looking forward to that, because I know housing is definitely an issue on the island, and I know that Tobagonians would definitely love to see that public-private partnership that can bring them that kind of relief. But Vaalmikki,
Oh, no, I was
like
just going to jump in and ask about the, you know, we keep talking about these things that we've been doing, right? So the energy sector, we've been working on the energy sector. We've been involved in it for how many ever decades now. You know, things like housing necessary. We always allocate enough money to deal with that. But one of the things that stood out to me inside this budget was the removal of taxes from things like digital economy.
Yes.
Yeah.
How do you think that is going to have an impact on us going forward, considering the pandemic has forced us all to move into a more digital
embrace
world?
digital
Yeah.
world,
Yeah, that's exciting.
Yeah, well, I think that for us to, and we were actually talking about that before the show started, for us to really take advantage, especially those SMEs that is really geared towards, to really take advantage and benefit from those tax reductions, those tax deductions, we have to try to continue to create an environment that is investor friendly and business friendly, because that is really the only way that you're going to encourage new entrepreneurs to take on that risk of going and venturing into something new for Trinidad and Tobago, fairly new for Trinidad and Tobago, and get more into the digital solution environment. Now, I like the fact that a lot of emphasis is being placed through the IFC on fintech, because being a financial economist, I have a little bias towards the financial sector, services sector. And this is taking the financial services sector digitally and diversifying the financial services sector as well. So what you can find, and of course the legislation has to allow for this, is for several small fintech startup companies to come on board, and then once the legislation allows for it, central bank and I think they have already started exploring the possibility of introducing a central bank digital currency as well, which can have a lot of benefits. For example, very low settlement times, instantaneous settlement times, I might add, transaction charges, charges that we might find from various banking institutions that are quite exorbitant. All of these things would be mitigated. Things like fraud, transactions, any transactions, as a matter of fact, that is done digitally can be monitored by the relevant authorities, be it the central bank, and then the issue with counterfeit money. Well, that's eliminated one time because everything is now digital. Fintech companies can start up using things and offer services like digital wallets, electronic wallets. And these things are already happening in many other countries. Just up the islands in Eastern Caribbean, they have already started exploring the possibilities of this. So going into that digital realm is clearly high up in the agenda, which I think is something quite positive. But in order to really take advantage of this, to really attract the investment from the private sector and for them to take the risk for this, we really have to start seriously looking at making the country more investor-friendly, more business-friendly. So take, for example, this very high shipping cost, the very high prices of importation of foreign goods. I mean, we can't help that at this point in time, because this is because of factors that are global, beyond our control.
But look at what Ghana did with that, though. That
right, I want to get into that as a matter of fact, right? But let me just make this particular point. When you find that the costs to import is so high, and if I'm a budding entrepreneur, and especially in looking at digital solutions now, and I think, okay, well, I could probably get a tax break. But the cost to import these items is ridiculously high. What am I going to do? I think this is something that the state needs to be cognizant of, and it's not too late for that, of course, because this is going to be around for the short term. I think it will last well into 2022 at the very earliest, because this pent-up demand is going to be here for at least the short term. What Guyana has proposed, and I don't think it's been implemented yet, but they've proposed that the CIF rate, the cost, insurance, and freight value, be deducted where you use the previous year's, last year's shipping costs, freight costs. So, for example, now it costs you about $17,500 to import a 40-foot container. Last year, that would have been about $2,500 to about $3,000.
Yeah.
Now, the position is actually getting worse, where some large companies, I was reading the other day, Black & Decker, for example, these large conglomerates, what they're doing is paying extra to lock in containers for themselves. So that has exacerbated the shortage of containers globally. Yep. What we can do is, one, we can consider something like what Guyana is doing. That would, of course, require some slight amendments to the Finance Act, which I don't think anybody would have any, objection to. Or, in addition to this, what they can do is say, okay, you're paying a CIF value, but we can, let's at least temporarily in the short term, until the shipping issue has died down, we could deduct, let's say, and this is an arbitrary figure, we can deduct a 40%, so the CIF minus 40%, right? That is not going to take care of the biggest cost, which is the cost of shipping, right? There's nothing the government can do about that. In a perfect world, we could subsidize shipping. But Guyana can't even do that. They won't even do that, so far less for us. So, but what they can do is give a marginal assistance to the importers, and we are a very import-intensive country. What they can do is look at ways to reduce that CIF value, at least temporarily, but it has to be within a legislative framework, because reducing the CIF value, some persons can argue, well, that's like under-invoicing, which is illegal. So you have to go to Parliament to make the relevant changes and use the accurate wording for it. In addition to this, you have to look at inefficiencies at the ports.
You know, we always have the issue of if even that is done, if we would feel it. As in the average man, if we would feel it, that's always a legitimate concern, because a lot of times we've seen the government put things into place to kind of cushion us, but it doesn't work. When the government says, okay, those who are the big corporations who are earning more, then I'm going to increase your tax. But what happens? That 30% is passed down to us. And it's the same thing. The government might say, okay, let us look at the shipping cost and let us see if we can, you know, somehow make some adjustments so that, but do we feel it?
Well, I think it has to be, in this particular instance, several adjustments. So it's not just about that CIF value reduction. Of course, you reduce the CIF value, you pay less duties and less VAT. And in addition to that, remember now, some VAT has been proposed to be removed on certain basic items, some of them which we actually import. But then there are a lot of inefficiencies at the port, especially when it comes to dealing with customs, that actually drive up the cost of doing business as well. All of these are transferred onto the consumer at the same time. So, for example, when you have to pay high port rental charges.
So it brings us back to what the government is trying to do, which is to privatize the port. Brings us back to whether we're moving from the BIR to the Revenue Authority, because all of these things would be affected, because we're also talking about the ease of doing business. And when you talk about, you know, having that digital economy, but you know, you have everything. We were talking about it yesterday, just a vaccination. You have a vaccination card and a piece of paper, and it's not even digitized. It's not even computerized. We realize we have a very, very, very long way to go.
Certainly, we do have a long way to go. But what really needs to happen is that, and there's an implementation issue. Every year in the budget, you have really good ideas. But
really good ideas.
And this country is not short of really good ideas and intelligent. And we have an intelligent population, right? We have to really accept that. But when it comes to the implementation part of it, that is where we fall short all the time. And that is why you see each year, budget after budget, a repeat of ideas. There's rollovers, yes. Because
the regularization
the implementation is just not there.
The liberalization of the fuel, of the fuel cost. But even though I like the idea of having a cap at the top in terms
the retail margin,
for the retail,
that's important.
That is critical.
Naturally,
That was
Mr. Jack
important.
has to leave us shortly, because you know you have a long day ahead in Tobago. But before you go, I'm curious as to if we have the same challenges in Tobago in regards to implementation. After you get the funding allocated, do you have the same challenges of implementation going down the road?
Well, what we are trying to do is to treat the implementation deficit. We have addressed it and treated with it. And what we are doing is tracking our performance, and what we're also implementing is a multi-year budgeting format. So we bring greater predictability in terms of not just the funding, but treating with the implementation issue as well. So divisions know from year 1 to year 2, 3 and 4, the projects that we will prioritize as an assembly moving forward.
And you guys also constantly do the monitoring and evaluation as you go forward, because you're saying you have a plan, but do we look back and say, all right, how did we do in that last leg of the plan?
And that is why in terms of each budget, I attempt to report on what we have achieved over the years, highlight the constraints and some of the challenges, and what we intend to do to address these issues.
But that's definitely been an issue in Tobago, though, in terms of how long it takes the projects to get completed.
And in some instances, it has been a funding challenge, and and by implementing or revised process of mobilization, funding through alternative financing mechanism, and by partnering with the private sector, we are addressing that, because one of the things, you know, that the private sector does fairly well in terms of completing projects. And if they are part of the process and private capital is funding some of the projects, we anticipate that will assist us in treating some of the implementation deficit. Additionally, we're working with some of our multilateral partners, both the CDB, the IDB, and the World Bank. They have also brought some technical assistance to us, and that is also assisting us in a lot of our project planning and execution.
Well, I look forward to what happens in Tobago this year. I know that there is still some issue with people being relocated as a result of the airport project. But I think the airport project is important. I don't care what anybody wants to say. I think it's no, it is. You can't. You see, people have a way of just making fools of themselves. So they complain that Tobago isn't being developed. But at the same time, nobody wants to move for the development to happen. They complain about tourism, but you don't want a proper terminal.
What we have done in terms of the airport project, we have worked with the persons affected. We have remunerated most of the persons for their lands, and to the affected persons as well, we have provided lands at Chauvin and at Cove at subsidized rates. We have also went to the extent of assisting some of the necessitous persons who are unable to bill and provisioning and assisting them. So we, as an administration, we are not unmindful of that, and we are not unreasonable, and we have gone over and beyond the call, and we are continuing the communication and the dialogue with affected persons to ensure that the resettlement process is as smooth as possible.
Joel Jack, thank you so much for being with us here. We do have to take a break. I wish you could have stayed with us longer.
Yes, well, so that we could promise to return. It's always nice seeing you. We can't do this once a year thing. So
I know, right? All right, Joel Jack, the Secretary of Finance, stay with us. We do have to take a break, but we have Vaalmikki Arjoon, who is still with us here, and we're going through what Column Imbert shared with us yesterday, and we've got quite a bit of goodies. We're going to get into some of them. All right, welcome back to the No Morning Show here on TTT. We're looking at the budget response, what Column Imbert shared with us yesterday, and just how it's going to affect the next fiscal year for Trinidad and Tobago. Now, this budget was talking about the resilience of the country in light of a pandemic. And while some of you may disagree, there are others of us who say, yes, we definitely have been resilient, because as they said, the country is still standing. And while we may have, what you said, some rubbish credit rating, that
He didn't say it like that, Natalie. Oh,
it's
gosh.
a rubbish credit rating.
It's called, we are still in the investment grade. It's not rubbish.
Right.
We're still in the investment grade, but one notch above the speculative or junk grade region in Standard & Poor's. But that junk grade region, that junk is an official term that is used by the credit rating agencies. Right. So,
but does it mean the same thing that we think it means?
It means really when you get to that level, what it actually means is that the global community, that they regard your ability to repay your debts, particularly more so your external debts, is riskier. Right, so in lending you funds, you are seen as a risky client.
Vaalmikki, what can the government do at this point to improve its credit rating? Because we have seen the country able to borrow quite a bit over the last year, which means that regardless of what people were saying, they had a credit rating enough to get them out there and to get the monies that they need.
We were able to, in fact, go to the global markets and borrow, issue bonds, given that we are still in the investment grade region by Standard & Poor's. What we have to remember is that these large global institutional investors, these investment banks that tend to purchase our international bonds when we issue them on the global market, they have a mandate. Most of them have a mandate that they can really only invest in investment grade bonds. Okay. So we really have to try to improve that credit rating and not fall into the junk bond grade region.
But what do we do to improve it?
So first of all, what we have going for us is the fact, as I indicated earlier, that revenues can in fact be more attractive than where they were last year.
From oil and gas prices.
From oil and gas prices. So what we actually need to firstly show the credit rating agencies is that we are taking concerted steps to avoid wastage in expenditure. It's not necessarily how much you spend, you know. We could cut expenditure, and we have been doing a good job at cutting it, but not cutting it to an extent where it shocks the economy greatly. But we have to show that we are serious about reducing the wastage in expenditure. And when we do take, nothing is wrong with borrowing in my point of view, but once you borrow for the more productive aspects of boosting revenue streams in the country, so you have enough money to plow back into the economy, but at the same time, be able to repay your debt, right? So we have to show, first of all, that, for example, when we engage in things like capital expenditure, the infrastructural works, that there are no delays, there are no cost overruns, because when you have cost overruns, it means what do you have to do? You have to go back again in the debt market.
Right.
Because a lot of capex is funded by debt.
But I don't know that Trinidad and Tobago has displayed over the last couple of years any kind of wastage in its spending.
Well,
I really can't think of it, even though you may have. We can speak about, if we're talking about cost overruns, we can see where the government has gone and several big projects cut their budget significantly.
Yeah, so certain aspects of recurrent expenditure we would have trimmed, and we've, like I said, we've done excellently in doing that to avoid any real shock to the system where a lot of people have lost jobs, etc. We've avoided that. But at the same time, when it comes to the more productive aspect, which is capital expenditure, I think that has been placed on the back burner every time we go into a situation of an economic downturn, when really that ought to have been more of the focus. Not necessarily by increasing the spending or by a greatly magnified amount, but by looking at the quality of the expenditure. So, for example, when you look at certain infrastructural projects, decades after decades, at times governments after governments, one government comes, another one comes in, you still see the same project that is there on the book. Sometimes it's not implemented, and the longer it takes to be completed, the costlier it is. Yes, because construction materials tend to go up every single year. You have times where contractors might over-invoice, and you have situations where there's poor procurement issues as well. Now, the government last year, and this is one of the areas in the budget that I quite like, because I myself was lobbying for this since 2018, they're looking at certain infrastructural avenues in the country, and how can we make that more profitable for the economy? And one of that is the Port of Port of Spain. Right. So I'm all in favor of that public-private partnership where you have a foreign, or if not foreign, be it a local, whatever the case may be, but a private investor getting into the port, because the port infrastructure has been languishing for a very long time. You have, for example, about 18 cranes at the port, and 13 of them don't have economic life. And the rest of them, the other 5 that are there that have economic life, they're very close to the end of the economic life. Wow. In 2018, when I did some research on the port, at that time it was costing just under $1 billion, about $900 million to upgrade the infrastructure at the port and dredge the port properly. At that point, and now of course that cost would have gone up. Yeah. So getting a private investor, remember, a private investor, their first motivation is the profit motivation. So they are going to not just bump up and improve the infrastructure in the port, not just dredge the port. They're going to do this in a cost-effective manner, but with the objective to pull back some of that market share that we would have lost to Jamaica, to Cuba, and the Dominican Republic when they privatized their port, when they dredged their port and allowed for some of the larger shipping vessels that were coming out of the Panama Canal, the Panamax vessels as they call it. We lost them. They went to Jamaica instead of the Kingston Freeport Terminal because they privatized, they got the capital, and were able to upgrade the infrastructure, etc. That is the model that we need to follow, and it appears to me that that is the model that we are likely to follow once we can get that private investor to come in and assist the government, assist the state in revamping the issue, in eliminating then the wastage and the issues at the port and upgrading the infrastructure as well. So but one thing that needs to happen is that it doesn't make sense that you upgrade the port, but you still have a poorly performing customs department. That is where the TTRE comes in. Mm-hmm. And that is where the TTRE can actually help to remove a lot of the inefficiencies that you see with customs. So for example, when you have to pay your customs charges, your import charges, you have to go in there physically Imagine that in 2021, you still have to go in there physically, and you can't use an online platform to do it.
Even to pay your taxes, you have to be walking into BIR.
But in Jamaica,
ridiculous.
you can. In Jamaica, for example, they use their version of the single electronic window to pay your port charges, your customs charges online. So when you and they accept only cash in Trinidad. So if it's $5,001 up to that, you have to pay it in cash at the cashier. Anything above that, you have to get a manager's check. So that is time wasted, and time is money in the business community.
Yeah.
So
you were saying something.
We can use that single electronic window to eliminate these inefficiencies then that cost us money at the same time.
Yeah.
And I guess that's all part of the whole digitization movement that's supposed to happen.
Correct.
Is that we're supposed to be able to implement those things. But I also see that the Minister of Finance pointed out that there would be a 40% capital allowance on research and development. Do you think that would affect that same thing you're talking about, where we only focus on infrastructure and it goes down the drain? Would that 40% capital allowance have any effect on?
Well, like I said, being a financial economist, I like to tie it back into the financial realm. And I think that is going to be quite handy for those companies, especially those startups, that would want to engage in research and development, especially when it comes to fintech-based companies.
Yeah. Right.
So I think...
And it's something I don't think I've ever seen from this government, that kind of putting things aside for research and development.
Yeah,
and
correct.
it is so critical, because yesterday we had Dr. Marilyn S. and Mariana Brown here, and one of the things we came to is that we are not data-driven, and we don't evaluate and we don't see, so we don't really know where we're at. It's kind of difficult to say, you know, how many people...
Which is what the Statistical Institute is supposed to help to alleviate. Because how can we as investors, be it local or foreign, want to make certain decisions as to whether we should put our monies in TNT, whether as a local businessman I should expand my business, when I don't have up-to-date data. For many years, administration after administration, we don't have up-to-date data. What is the real unemployment figure in the country?
Exactly.
What are the quarterly growth rates? In the US, you just Google it and you get it one time.
How many of us are below the poverty line? We just don't know. But I know we're almost out of time, but one of the things the minister threw out some words yesterday for the people who thought that, you know, Trinidad and Tobago needed to go to the IMF, and he says, not now. It's not that they don't use the IMF programs, or they use the programs that are necessary, but they're not going to be going to the IMF to borrow. How do you feel about this, that, you know, what the minister said about
I think
not
it's
going
really
to the IMF?
the context in which the minister meant it. A lot of us are still haunted by the memories of the 1980s, which was, in fact, being an economist and having several colleagues at the IMF, I know that a lot has changed since then. Back in the 1980s, when you go through a restructuring program, it's very rigorous, and you have to take certain very tough measures, some of which are successful and some of which fail. In fact, there are some countries that they did not have a positive experience with the IMF, but now things are different. And I don't think anyone is really suggesting that you go under an IMF program, like what Jamaica would have done and what Barbados would have done. For the pandemic, the IMF would have offered certain very, very low-cost loans for the pandemic, to help with the pandemic fallout. About 7 or 8 countries from CARICOM would have accepted that particular loan. And it was given...
Trinidad and Tobago one of them?
No,
Trinidad
no, that is the SDR,
okay.
and that is not a loan.
Okay.
And that is actually an excellent shot to the liquidity for the globe that the IMF has given. But prior to that, the rapid financing instrument, that was a low-cost loan that was provided to many countries across the world, that is supposed to help cope with the economic fallout from the pandemic. I think Bahamas got theirs at 1.025%. But the going rate is about 1.05%. So at such a low rate, it could have made some sense to approach them for that loan, and all you would have had to do is write a letter of intent stating what you're using the money for, and what is your strategy to help the economy at the end of the day when the pandemic does subside. It was not an issue where the IMF was coming in and telling you what to do with your economy. So I think going forward, we have to remember the IMF is not a big bad wolf.
Not anymore.
Yeah, not as we would have thought that they were back in the 1980s. But I think at this point in time, especially given the SDR allocation we got from the IMF, at this point, that is no longer necessary.
All right. Vaalmikki, we want to thank you so much for being with us here today. You never know an hour could go by so fast, right?
Well, actually, no. And it's quite refreshing to be in a physical studio for a change after such a long time.
I know, right? So that's why we try to get people in studio. We know that it's really, having this conversation on Zoom is kind of, it doesn't really make much sense. But thank you so much for being with us here this morning. And I'm sure we'll continue the discussion at some other time.
Well, thank you for having me.
You're most welcome. Vaalmikki, Arjoon there. So, Rokas?
Yeah, I mean, we continue. We have another hour coming up, more guests coming up. So, guys, stay tuned. It's the Now Morning Show right here on TTT, where the budget matters.